a lesson learned that gets applied early in the year can have significant impacts to your bottom line and how much cash you have going out the door versus how much you have coming in the door. So that's just kind of a very high level, very rough primer on the oil and gas industry for those of you who might not be as familiar with oil and gas as others. Let's see, specific to our team and BI analytics and data governance at Chesapeake. Our data governance team was established in 2017, and our central reporting team, which we would call BI analytics, was established in early 2018. Initially, they were two separate teams, and we consolidated them to one team in 2019. There were a lot of reasons for this, but what we found is kind of one of the primary reasons for consolidation was that having good data and having data accessible was the same thing as reporting data. That we were working so close together, and our overlap was so great that it made sense to consolidate and approach the problems as one unified team. And our purpose really, roughly defined, is providing enterprise reporting. So those things that have a corporate audience, that have a lot of complexity wrapped around them and involve multiple data families. So you think, a data family, one might be accounting, another data family might be safety and regulatory. So where you're combining data that you don't have a single expert to do all of that work, you need multiple experts to collaborate on explaining how that data interacts with each other. And then we also want to facilitate data solutions. So we do things like support our data scientists on the front end with data governance, on the back end with reporting. But we also try and be a partner with businesses for specific problems. We found early on that from a central reporting perspective, we can't move fast enough to satisfy business demand, which is a good thing. It means that our businesses are continuing to ask more in-depth, more detailed questions, and we can't keep up with that. And so instead of being the bottleneck, we want to be a facilitator to help them get to the answers they need without getting in their way. And so with that, Power BI comes along about the same time that our central reporting and DSG teams were standing up. And we really tried to push Power BI at Chesapeake initially. And initial adoption, we had a few issues. There was a lack of training. It was just a new tool. And we probably did not do a great job of deploying that. We kind of said, here's this new tool and have fun with it. So, kind of helping people see use cases and drivers for using Power BI versus other tools that we might have. We didn't do that for the organization, and then we didn't really provide a compelling reason to migrate away from the existing tools. We had 10 years plus of infrastructure built out for our other BI tools, and we didn't have anything in existence for Power BI, and we didn't have anything set up to create that infrastructure at first. And so I'll applaud the overall business. I mean, they have seemed very eager to adopt Power BI, and they have worked very hard on their own big. But I think it is. It's been a hard slog for them trying to adopt the tool initially. And then we had some structural challenges. Our data architecture didn't support Power BI. Providing access to data and access to the right data was challenged. And then innovation across IT and the business was also difficult because, we, as the business needed additional resources or additional data, we didn't have a clear to get them to that information. And so as the business evolved and their data needs evolved, we were able to respond quickly to address those needs. So as a result, we kind of had a limited business case for adopting Power BI and new reporting. A lot of what was going on was with old tools that we were familiar with, and a lot of stuff was being done in spreadsheets. Not that that's inherently bad, but there can be more efficient ways of doing business. So that's kind of a quick history of Power BI at Chesapeake. So what we decided was, other teams were working the data issues kind of independent of us, and we started to, in late 2018 or in early 2019, start taking these individual strategies and combining them into an overall strategy. And what we found was that we were going to be far more effective if we could get our data in a position that would better support the overall organization. And that we would be able to right size our BI tools and get data to the people that needed it, get new data and new information as our business evolved. If we could combine projects within IT that just made data easier to get a hold of. And so one issue, kind of the first issue that was identified across the organization was that we had multiple data warehouses. So back in 2007, we kicked off a really powerful and great data warehouse, EDW1, that housed almost all of our information and really did a lot to combine operational and financial data, and it had a centralized governance approach. And it was a powerful tool. I came to Chesapeake in late 2009, and it was like manna from heaven versus what we'd seen I'd seen in other organizations that I've been a part of. So it was phenomenal. In 2010, it continued to grow and build out. But because of the centralized model and because it was pretty IT centric and pretty technical, the business really didn't have a lot of involvement in it, and it struggled to evolve with the business. Come 2015, we had a big data platform called Cloudera that we brought in, and that really helped with our advanced analytics and data science teams. We did such a good job building it out. A lot of the business wanted in to use it for standard reporting. And so because it was more popular than we'd imagined or we'd initially thought, it quickly kind of grew beyond what it was capable of handling, and more new technologies came along. And so SAP came with its own data warehouse in 2016, and then with big data kind of reaching its limits and requiring some significant investment, we started researching cloud programs or cloud data warehouse solutions that would provide that big data computational power, but couple it with significant storage and kind of solve both of our problems, max storage and max computational power at the same time. And so EDW2 came in, and we flirted with it for a little bit and realized that wasn't going to provide quite everything we wanted to. And so we came with, in 2019, the cloud data warehouse. It's in AWS, and it sits on top of a program called Snowflake. And so that's been our data journey. And so now this year, we're really focused with the business on consolidating and getting rid of or retiring these legacy data warehouses, or at least big portions of the legacy data warehouses, and consolidating all of our data into one data warehouse where it's co-located and connections are made, so that if people want to ask, as team members want to ask different questions that maybe we've never been able to ask before between the disparate departments or disciplines, we can do that. And so that's kind of where we're at right now with our data. And then we took a look at our reporting environment, and because we had so many data warehouses and we had 3 different technologies, SpotFire, Power BI, and SSRS, we found that there were over 14,000 reports across 3 different technologies being run, and those files in any given year, that's a 1-year metric. And files that got stored in non-standard locations and formats were difficult to track down and figure out what those supported. And many of those were duplicative because of how it had been set up. So we over time, I think in 2014, 2015, 2016, our IT department started to move away from a centralized governed model to kind of a federated model. And people were able to start building out the infrastructure for our BI tools, but unfortunately, we hadn't kind of thought through all the ramifications of what everybody was doing. And so our structure just kind of forced people, if one business unit developed a report that others liked, they had to go back in and kind of recreate those reports and modify them slightly to fit their business needs. And so, kind of reinventing the wheel 4, 5, 6 times, not very efficient, and could lead to a lot of confusion if you had somebody who built a report out slightly different than somebody else. And same chart, same category, same graphics, but slightly different answers became a big frustration across the company because it drew a lot of questions on the data of, what can I trust and how do I know which one is the right answer? These look the same. They're coming from two different people or two different business units. What's going on here? And so our solution to all of this was to take a holistic approach to data. Kind of the graphic in our mind on what we saw as being our challenge is on the left, right? You kind of got non-standard, probably not up to code, plumbing and electrical. And then over on the right side, you have this clean system where, you probably have a nice schematic where if there's an issue, you can easily resolve the issue. If you have something that needs to be updated or upgraded, you can easily switch that component out without causing, a catastrophic failure. And so we felt like in order for Power BI and our team, for Power BI to be adopted well and for our teams to leverage it in a way that made sense and other BI tools as well, we needed to address architecture issues, security issues, and I will say, not that we had an insecure data structure, but it was very complex with a lot of security groups that you had to get access to in order to view certain reports. We also wanted to drive ownership and accountability of the data down to the business. That was kind of seen as an IT function, and we don't know what the data means. We don't own that data. We don't enter it in. We don't manage it. And so we wanted to be able to push that ownership and accountability where it needed to be to reduce some of the frustrations that the business was having. And then, of course, as earlier mentioned, we wanted to just reduce the complexity of our overall environment so that it was just easier to do anything, whether it was an update, an upgrade, a change, or just going out and finding the information you needed to do your day-to-day work. So we came up with this self-service model, and the kind of the key drivers for it are we want people to find their data, trust their data, own their data, and we want to enable people to be able to drive their business the way they see fit. And so going from, on the find side, we had difficulty collating and accessing data. We wanted a central location for data and reports with a catalog that was for visibility so that, if I don't know what I'm looking for, I can go and search through that catalog and find the right answer or the right source for that answer and use that instead of maybe doing what I think I know is right, or maybe what somebody down the hall said is the solution. Also wanted to help people trust their data. And, one thing that we heard initially was that a lot of people were struggling with, data quality. And as we started to dig into the issues around data quality, what we found was that the data wasn't inherently the problem. It was people using the wrong source because they didn't know what the right source was, or people using non-standard calculations or different calculations for their business needs, but labeling it all the same. And so what we wanted to do was create visibility around data so that people could look at it and say, okay, I understand what's going on here and I trust that data. So creating visibility on what is happening as a piece of data leaves the source system where a team enters it in, whether that's hand keyed or some kind of automated process, as it traveled through our data infrastructure into the data warehouse and into tables that people use. We wanted people to see kind of what was going on behind the scenes. So that way, if they had any questions or doubts around that data, they could see that transparency. We also wanted to push those solutions, those data solutions, out of IT and into the business, so that if there's a data question, if there's a question, the teams have the ability to get that data, position the data, and then use the data, as opposed to having to wait on IT to do that for them. And then that by finding and trusting and owning that data, we've enabled people to service their own needs and not have to wait on IT to get around to that project. So, solution, kind of to sum it up, a single data platform was what we're working towards. And I want to be clear, we are in the middle of this process. So kind of some of the stuff we share is still theoretical as we try to execute on it. We're in the process of creating that self-service model that promotes innovation and where we're able to operationalize great ideas for the rest of the organization, instead of the rest of the organization having to, reinvent the wheel over and over again. Remove that complexity by retiring some or all of our legacy systems. streamline the groups that have security so that it's easy, for especially a new employee or employee who moves from one team to another. It's very easy for them to get access to the data they need, and there's significantly less complexity around that. Streamline the technology stack. On the back end for IT, there's a big cost savings for this, but on the front end for the organization, it makes it a lot less confusing. Right now, if you're wanting certain answers to questions, you have to go to Cloudera or EDW1. It kind of depends on what your question is and where that data is available. We wanted to get rid of those problems and have one source of the truth for the organization. And then we also want to take data models that Power BI really exists on, and we want to build those in the background. And that way people can use those and reuse those for different purposes. So you figure like you're tracking operational costs and the metrics that often go with that, per unit costs. Same with capital, your per unit capital costs. So we wanted to position those. Those can be a little complex in calculating them. We wanted to pre-position those data models out there. So that way people can use those, and we'll build reporting off of it using Power BI. We're actually in the process of doing that, but we'll also have those data models existing in the background for people to use them for other purposes that maybe they have already and they haven't been able to use the data models yet, or they haven't been able to build that reporting yet because the data models are too complicated. Or I'm sure there are going to be solutions that are needed for problems that come up tomorrow or next year that those data models should be able to assist with. One thing we've done, just don't want to go into too much detail here, but we also took this data warehouse. We knew we were going to be dumping a lot of information into it, and most teams would only need to access on any given day a slice of that information. So we divided our data warehouse, single source, but we divided it into 6 domains. This kind of helps with security, but it really is there to make it easier and clear out some of the noise. So you figure somebody in drilling probably doesn't need to know a whole lot about land or marketing information. They're really just focused on drilling that next well. And so we wanted to make sure that it was easy for them to navigate in their own domain and not having to kind of filter through fields and tables that they would never access. So we kind of divided the organization into 6 domains with certain data families in each domain. And then there's an enterprise domain that's overarching, and that kind of has all those common data elements to it that we know that probably make up 80 to 90% of every query. So, for us, it would be well number, well name, location, state, county, just the common information that most queries are built on. And then from there, we knew, one thing we didn't want to do is create this slick environment from the IT perspective and kind of leave dump this into the lap of the business and say, look, we created something far greater than you've ever seen, and figure out how to use it. So our data governance team had built out data family roles to drive accountability with the data. We had data owners and data owners, and they were responsible for their team's data already, but we helped them set up a process to approve data classification. Is this an internal attribute, or is this something that's sensitive that needs a more strict audience that we can control more? For calculations, we wanted them to approve the logic for enterprise solutions. So an example of that, I think probably in every industry out there, when you're in a capital project, the big component to that, aside from the cost, is how long is it going to take for this capital project from start to finish? And so, for us, cycle times are probably just as important as any other organization out there. But especially if we have one rig drilling 40 wells, understanding that well cycle time or that rig's cycle time is going to provide you insight on how much money you're going to spend, how efficient that rig is going to be. And so, for say our drilling data family, defining what cycle time means and that, approving that calculation is important, because then that calculation now is out there for the rest of the organization to use for their metrics. And there's there's much less of a chance of somebody calculating it wrong. And then they designate the rest of their data family team to help with kind of the day-to-day management of data in that family. So we have data stewards who are responsible for specific entities. Some of our data families are quite large, and so having one subject matter expert is not going to be reasonable. They're going to need to be multiple. I think safety and regulatory would be an example of that. You know, we've got safety is one component of our HSER team. Regulatory environment is another component, and then, you know, there are multiple components to both of those. So, you know, having multiple subject matter experts is quite necessary for that. So assigning them out. They also serve as a touch point within a data family for questions from other parts of the business as well as IT. And of course, you've got your BI developers that are, this is less formal. Anybody can be a BI developer if they want to be, and they're out there creating their own reports with their custom expressions and you know, developing more reports but they're also there to provide guidance around reporting, and they serve as a conduit for communication with the broader organization. So we had those already established before we kind of kicked off our data journey back in 2018 or mid 2018. And so the positions that we added for our new kind of data warehouse self-service model were community roles, domain roles. So we have a manager within each domain, and you know, they manage access, they designate roles, they can also do some approvals. Our community developers are there to develop the data models that our BI tools will sit on top of. They can develop and they can approve those models, and they register those models with the tool we call Collibra. Well, everybody calls it Collibra, but we'll talk about Collibra here in a second. And then you've got members who can build out reports and data models in Sandbox for the developers to promote up to production. And so our model, kind of the landscape looks like this. You can see down at the bottom, you've got your source systems, and we just listed a few that we use down here. You've got an enterprise warehouse and the source data, and that's managed by the IT. That's an IT core function, you know, making sure that those source systems are always up and running and available, that the source data is getting put into our data warehouse, and that the enterprise domain within the warehouse is fully functioning and working correctly and continuing to evolve with the business. That's IT's responsibility. And then the self-service model comes in with the domain warehouses where people are more free to explore and innovate. And then you've got your BI and analytics tools that our organization uses, which are Plotly, Power BI, and TIBCO. And then you've got data catalog and glossary, business glossary terms, and that's through the tool that we have called Collibra. So deploying Power BI, you know, how do we navigate across, you know, the 14,000, depending on who you ask, 30,000 reports that we have out there? What we want to do is match the right BI tool to the use case. You know, one thing that we really like Power BI for is it is with the Microsoft suite. So, you know, I think as I've read and kind of researched through Gartner, you know, most organizations need a multi-BI tool approach to satisfy their business needs. But we see Power BI kind of being in the future, the common report that we use, or the common tool that we use for a broader organization. So one thing we're trying to help people get through and migrate to the data warehouse, to the new data warehouse. We don't want to just lift and shift all of our data over there. We know some of it's gone stale. We know some of it might have some inaccuracies because it hasn't been updated as the business has evolved over the last 10 plus years. And then the reporting, we know that we've got a lot of duplicate reporting and maybe some reporting that's no longer relevant to the organization, but you know, it's set on some kind of auto generate, and so nobody's gone in and looked at it to see how relevant it is to today's environment. And so what we want to do is we want to know or address, you know, what's our business problem, what's our business purpose, what questions are we trying to answer, what are we driving with the BI tool that we're using, and what's the answer that we're seeking. And then we want to create logical connections between reports. We want to make sure that, you know, especially within Power BI with the applications and the use of dashboards that, you know, again, with tens of thousands of reports flying around, we want to make sure that it becomes an easy place for anybody to navigate whether it's with easy to navigate across the space. And I kind of think back to my planning days when I worked pretty closely with the vice president of our business unit, and our vice presidents were receiving 100 BI reports every week in some form or fashion. Sometimes they came over as a PowerPoint or a download into Excel or whatever the case might be, but there was a lot of information coming to them, some of which they used as it came across, some of which they only used if they needed it. And so what we want to do is streamline that traffic to a VP so it becomes easier for them and their leadership teams and the individual contributors to understand the state of the business, and then when a question needs to be answered, that it's easy for everybody to see where that question is coming from, i.e. what graph or what report it's coming from, and it's easy to go out and research that. And then we want to operationalize enterprise solutions. So if somebody's doing something great in one business unit, we want to help mature and promote that from IT across the organization. And then we want to monitor usage. So as the reports aren't being used as much, so we can figure out what's going on. Is that something that needs to be retired, or is that something that is no longer relevant to the organization, needs to be updated? So we see Power BI as our vehicle for doing this. Collibra is our data governance tool. It creates a data catalog that we'll be using to provide that visibility and accountability of, hey, here's the data, here's where it's coming from, here's what's happening to it as it travels through the data warehouse to your report. And so if anybody has questions, they can, see what's going on. If they don't agree, there's a mechanism within Collibra that allows them to raise a flag and say, hey, I think this is wrong and we need to talk about it. And that's when the data stewards come in along with the data governance team to have those conversations and the dialogue about what the solution should be. It can also serve as a report registry, so you can register your reporting in there. And this is to help reduce duplication. And in that way, if I need a production report or a capital report or an operation expense report, I can go out there and look to see if it exists before I start just generating one on my own. And if one exists and it meets my needs, great. If one exists and it meets most of my needs and I need to modify it slightly, I can take that report, take it down into my space, modify it, and then I can re-register that report as well. And then eventually we'd like to get to a place where we can certify critical business reports and essentially be able to say, hey, still working through the details on this, but this is a bronze or silver or gold certification that we've done certain due diligence at each level to say, the data in here follows the standards that we have set out. It uses only source system data. It only uses, terms in accordance with the business, or data in accordance with the business glossary. And, we even provide potentially like data quality scores that people could rely on for making business decisions. And it's all towards a path of sustainability, right? We want clear lines of responsibility and good governance so that we don't explode into having tens of thousands of reports, many of which may or may not even get used or may be incorrect in general. And so this is just kind of, how we envision deploying Power BI, streamlining our reporting for decision making. Think that business unit with the VP that's getting many reports every week, every month, creating that, using Power BI to create that kind of centralized dashboard that would then have components within it for safety, production, operating expenses, capital expenses, land, marketing type information. And then, as you go from the dashboard into individual reports, you've kind of got a high level set of reports with a few graphics on the dashboard, but maybe a little bit more detail down below. And then even beyond that, there's the ability to navigate from report to report to even more detailed information. So, the management team and the VP can kind of hang out at a higher level and monitor the overall health of the business. And then as questions come up, they can go down a little bit, but they can also delegate that out to our engineers, our geologists, and our technicians and analysts to find out what's going on further into the details. And that information is hopefully readily available so that people can go out and research that relatively quickly and provide those answers back up to the broader team. And you think represented in here, you're probably looking at, just for our average business unit, over 20 applications and all of that being consolidated into one data warehouse. Whereas now, probably 60 to 70% of what we're talking about here is in a data warehouse, or previously would have been in a data warehouse, and it probably would have been divided pretty evenly between two distinct data warehouses. So, we've made that data available and made it available through one source or one system. And that a lot of this data, again, is modeled so that logical connections have already been made so that you can start to tie different disparate data to each other for additional analysis. So you want to address, our goal is to not only address our known reporting needs, but build it for multiple cases so that way in the future, it can answer new questions as well. So, just kind of building on that, multi-use data models are equal different ways to evaluate that data. So kind of taking that same, hierarchy chart for dashboards and reporting, you can take rig cycle time, safety, well costs, and well performance, and take that data and mash it up against each other to see what impact does safety have on rig cycle time and well cost. What impact does rig cycle time have on safety? And how much impact does cycle time have on well performance? Maybe faster isn't better. Maybe if we slow down a little bit, we can reduce operating costs or improve well performance over time. These are questions that are kind of difficult to answer now, but having data in a single source and having those data models built out and connected to one another, you start to be able to ask some of those questions that we've just kind of scratched the surface on historically, but maybe we can, and then you can flip that over on its head and say, well, let's focus on our well production and how do capital expenses impact future well production. How do we optimize our operating expenses based on well production, rig cycle time, et cetera? So, those are kind of what we see as being the exciting part of what we're doing, and we think that consolidating into one data warehouse probably going to take. We've been working on it, really focused on it since late Q3 of 2019, and we've gotten probably 60% of the data out there at the enterprise level, but there's still a lot of work to do to be able to get to where the data models are out there and collaborating with one another for the broader organization to use. But that's kind of the data journey we're on, and what we're hoping to get out of Power BI and some of our other tools. With that, and I'm sorry about this little scribble there. I don't know how that got there. I think from there, I'll see if there are any questions. I'll open up the chat here. Let's see, give me just a second. So I think, let's see. So it looks like the question for Brandon is Chesapeake Energy use of common data service models. Yeah. So that is what we're working on, and those models will be built out within the data warehouse. Kind of a, I wouldn't call it a semantic layer, but it is built out in the data warehouse. We have flirted with Power Platform. We've not implemented it fully. I'm not sure about the e-commerce data flows or processes. I'm not familiar with that.
Well, Scottie, one question that I had, I know that, like you mentioned, there's still a big SpotFire usage base there at Chesapeake, and what are some of the biggest kind of contrasts or hurdles that big time SpotFire users have had in trying to adopt Power BI?
I think, I don't want to speak for everybody. I think one of the biggest hurdles that we had early on, because our team was made up of a lot of really powerful or strong SpotFire techs and analysts, we tried to use Power BI like it was SpotFire, and it's not. It is a different tool, and so I think that's kind of been one of our biggest hangups, and maybe across the organization, something similar to it is doing a lot of the modeling outside of Power BI and then using Power BI, especially for like the DAX functions. I think that's where we found our most success is modeling the data before we ingest it into Power BI, which is different than how we use SpotFire today.
Interesting. So, like, you mean you focused on kind of pushing the data modeling outside of the tool? kind of trying to get it into your EDW 2.0 platform first and then consume it from Power BI there?
That's the goal. And then, of course, I don't think you'll be able to model everything out for every use case. And those models will have to grow over time. That's how Power BI has been set up. And we set up what we call information links, which take data from different tables and different areas and mash them together, so that SpotFire can just leverage the information links. And so that's really been kind of what we've been doing with Power BI over the past 6 months is kind of creating that same type of infrastructure within Snowflake, our new data warehouse.
Nice. Okay. I saw a question from Tony Borelli, kind of asked how spatial analytics fit into this data journey.
Yeah, that is a really great question. The spatial component within an oil and gas company is extremely important, because not only are you operating on the surface of the earth and needing to understand where things are located and where they fit in relation to one another, but then you're also drilling up to up to 1 or 1.5, maybe even 2 miles below the surface of the earth, and then you're bending your wellbore so that you drill another 2 or 3 miles laterally, horizontal to the surface of the earth, except you're a mile below it or 2 miles below it. And so you can imagine with the heat and the pressure and everything going on down there, the importance of understanding where that 15,000 foot lateral wellbore sits relative to the wellbore you're going to drill just 500 feet away from it, and making sure that at the very basic level, that you don't have any safety issues where you drill into something that already exists that can create a whole host of safety issues for you. But on top of that, you're putting your wellbores around each other, so that way they're not competing against one another. And so it's important. What we've found is that Power BI there's a lot of progress has been made around spatial analytics within Power BI, but for now we still see that solution being more around SpotFire instead. And right now our spatial analytics too, the other piece that we have with that is it is that data warehouse, or the warehouse where it resides, is on-prem. So we're also dealing with complexities around having the GIS component on-prem with the rest of our data out in the cloud. And so that's been another challenge that we've had to work through as well. It's a great question.
One thing I had not heard of before your presentation here is that Collibra platform, and I don't know how far along you are with that, but as you were describing the organization of data into domains and families, which sounds like a really nice map that anyone can understand. I think that question is probably a common challenge for all of us. We build these great reports and we know what's in them and how good they are, but for the people who are just sitting in the business, they're working on a business problem one day and the next day, and then suddenly they say, I need some data. What's their first step? I mean, for a lot of them, I'm sure it's open up Outlook, email so-and-so, say, where do I get this data? But is the Calibra platform, is that part of the story of where you're hoping to go, that might become a nexus for that information? And do they have access to change things in that platform?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So I will say, we are onboarding Collibra actually this week. So we hope to have a live environment sometime this week, maybe sometime next week, where we can start putting in our data catalog that we've been building out kind of in Excel on the side as we migrate data into. What we felt is we retire these old legacy systems and move data into the new system. Essentially what we're doing, and my team members will probably, I'm going to butcher this, so I apologize before I say it. But essentially, I've got an object that sits out in my old data warehouse. I don't want to just move that object over. First, I want to make sure that it's being used, and so we make sure that it's still relevant to the business. And then we work through that logic with the data stewards to say, listen, you have this sitting in the old data warehouse. You've told us it's still relevant, or we see that it's being used in reports, so it must be, we're assuming it's still relevant. What is the logic that you you have behind that, and let's recreate the logic, make sure that it makes sense, make sure that we're sourcing that data from the correct source, as opposed to, to your point, where we're familiar with that data. And so we're documenting all of that as we move it into the data warehouse. And then that right now sitting in Excel spreadsheets on SharePoint, but theoretically is available for anybody to access. But it's hard to remember where that SharePoint is for the average individual. It's hard for me to remember where those SharePoints sit, and I'm on the team. And so Collibra becomes that repository over the long term. And there are a couple other really, really cool tools. It kind of depends on what your use cases are, but Collibra is the one that we picked. It tracks the data catalog, right? What's going on with that data. It has the search functionality to help you find it. You can also match it with business glossary terms. So, I think a good example would be production. There are multiple definitions or multiple use cases around production for Chesapeake. You think there's there's net production, gross production. There's the actuals that accounting books. There's the daily field estimates that come in, and so helping people get to the right data point. First off, what production are you looking for when you go and search for that term? You can find that, and then it will tell you, okay, well, here's where that field is stored within the data warehouse. And if you need to understand the logic behind it, here's what's going on. And so, yeah, the idea is that instead of emailing your friend down the hall, you're going to Collibra and using that and finding the source versus what is preferred by somebody 2 doors down.
That sounds like a really powerful proposition. That sounds kind of like the dream world if people will engage in it. So it may be that, in a good way, not like dreaming, but it maybe when you get that rolling, I'm sure we'd probably love to have you come back and show how it works. If Collibra will let you do that, I'm sure they'd be happy for you to do that too. But
sure, yeah, we'd love to share that story.
That's neat. And I think Brian asked one other question that was, how does Chesapeake allow business users to consume and join and use external public data or paid domain data sources? I know like IHS is a good example in the energy space.
That's a great question, and that's a conversation, Brian, that we're having right now. Right now you go out to wherever that information is positioned, and either you set up connection or you download it to a spreadsheet and ingest it into your report. So definitely not the most efficient way of doing it. It's all, any solution you have today is manual with our current data warehouses. So we've actually just started kicking off the conversation of how do we ingest this data into our primary data warehouse, and then make that available to everybody. I think, as we've talked through it, and again, we haven't done it yet, but I think step one is we want to make sure that all data is tagged with its source. And so that way, if we were to ever, if we're buying third-party data and we stop buying that third-party data, usually you have to purge it from your system. And so we want to make sure that, we have fingerprints on that, or have that data tagged so that it, wherever it exists in our system, we can easily purge it. And ideally, you would be able to replace it with a like data set, so that way you don't leave kind of the users in the lurch with their analytics tools. And then on top of that, bringing in, I think, like the NOAA data around weather and that kind of information. We're working on that too. So we're excited about that, but we've really only started really seriously on that journey probably last week. So we're very early in the stages on that. Business users have rights to Collibra. So Collibra is set up. We were able to negotiate it where anybody can have read-only access to Collibra. They're more restricted to our data stewards as far as having edit rights to Collibra. So yes, as reports get built by our average BI developer, they won't be able to register it, but there will be somebody in their domain or in their data family that will be able to register those reports for them.
Wow, excellent. Well, that's about 11:15. I'll give just 2 seconds while I talk. If anyone has one more question, you can put it in the chat. But mostly, I think what we want to say is thank you, Scottie, because this presentation was very helpful to see the whole journey that you started all the way back in 2007 with a data warehouse that was, very capable and good, but still, the needs of the business kept, outpacing even what that really great data warehouse could do. And so, how you've tried to adapt and respond to that and taken a people and a process focus. So, yeah, thank you very much for being with us and sharing that. And again, I'll get this recording available on our website, because I know a lot of people are going to want to probably go back and look at some of that again, some of the tools and approaches that you took here. So thanks a lot.
Yes, sir. Thank you all so much for your time, and we appreciate the opportunity and look forward to more collaboration.
Nice. All right, great. Ashley says, you killed it, boss. So there you go. Okay, well, thank you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to take a 15-minute break for those who don't want to miss anything. So we'll be back right at 11:30. You can grab that second or third or fourth cup of coffee and microwave some of those pizza rolls. And we'll be back to hear Zoe Douglas talk about Power BI architecture, grouping visuals, and modeling DAX patterns. You definitely won't want to miss it. Be right back.